If you're like me and you care massively about addressing the Sustainable Development Goals and creating a post-pandemic recovery that is intelligent and creates many, many millions of jobs all over the world, it's really important to understand how we can create fund structures and institutions that are truly fit for purpose and that can fill many of the funding gaps, doing capacity building and access to capital, and opening up access to capital and democratizing capital in a way that can dramatically accelerate how we address the SDGs all over the world. It's my vision to create a bank, a sustainable innovation and development bank called Transform Global. And part of that is that bank will create and manage a fund called the SDG 360 Game Changer Fund, which would be £9 billion at launch. And at launch could be as little as 1 year after the first 15 million of equity is raised into Transform Global itself. Well, this presentation that I'm going to show you now covers the SDG 360 Game Changer Fund, how it can be raised, how it can be managed and operated. There'll be a separate video that explains how it's actually deployed, how that capital is deployed. And there's also separate videos on Transform Global itself, on how we will capitalize and raise funds for the bank itself and for the Game Changer Fund, the detail of that. There's separate videos on Big Crowd, part of the broader vision for a sustainable innovation and development bank, and funding the global goals.tv, and how all this fits together, as well as a video explaining our governance structure and share structure and our foundation, the Transform Global Trust Foundation, and why that plays a critical role. But for right now, let's get into it. Let's take a look at how we're going to raise £9 billion and how it's going to be managed. This is really about the fund features, the umbrella fund features for the bank. First of all, it talks about a global connected capacity building. And the idea really is this vision for both the bank and for the fund, its cornerstone initial fund. At $9 billion, it should be the largest impact investment fund raised to date. At the time of launch, certainly it is, or right now it would be. And if it can be raised inside a year, I think it still would be. But it's not just about size, it's about its catalytic impacts and its capacity building. So this is really about not just direct investing, but it's about the infrastructure of addressing the global goals, the sustainable development goals, and delivering impact and ESG related finance all over the world. That's really what it's about. Systemic. So SDG 360 Game Changer Fund, it recognizes in the name it's designed to be a whole systems designed. It's designed to be holistic, a 360-degree vision to address the SDGs. Catalytic. So we talked about that briefly, but the idea is it will not only direct invest into meaningful businesses and ventures and infrastructure projects through its what we call the butterfly basket portfolio structure of direct investing. It's also designed to have a special opportunities fund and the bank itself that will receive some of the capital from the fund. And that means that we can be investing into other complementary structures and platforms that can be highly catalytic, that can potentially co-invest or follow-on invest or pre-invest to the deals that we're investing into through the main portion of the fund. In addition, it's designed to be highly diverse around themes and sub-themes, but also the stages of impact all over the world. That's really ambitious, and we recognize some people might question a strategy that's so broad. But what I would say is what this does is it fills gaps intelligently, and where we lose points for being broad, we gain many points for the scale and the connected intelligence that this fund can deliver. So we mentioned in previous presentations, it's a permanent capital structure. So the 9 billion and the first 210 million of that raise, it's really designed not to be a 10-year fund structure like venture capital, but to be a evergreen fund structure. So although it will be a vehicle that investors invest into, that vehicle will be designed to list within 4 to 6 years of launch. and therefore it becomes a permanent capital vehicle. As I said, 4 to 6 year target listing timeframe. Now, part of the strategy to raise such a large fund is really about who do you incentivize and how do you incentivize them to really get involved, and to do so at the point when you're credible enough for this to be really, really exciting for them. And it's also really important to make their competitive spirits and juices flow. So what we've realized is we're raising an initial 15 million of equity through stages which you'll learn about in a little while. And after that, there will be a combined 300 million raise. Now that 300 million raise, 90 of it will be equity into Transform Global, and 210 will be a pre-commitment to the fund that is only paid contingent on successfully raising the fund. So what essentially those investors for that 210 million get, they will get fund units like equity in the fund, and they get them at a more attractive rate, a better price effectively than the main 9 billion investors in recognition of their earlier commitment. Now we think that these investors in that combined 300, they can be some of the most important and most connected impact investors and financiers and philanthropists anywhere in the world. And ideally, while it would be possible to raise that full 300 from one, we think it would be best to raise it from a small collection of high impact entrepreneurs and investors and organizations that can be value adding. And they could include some of the banks who would participate as well. Now, essentially, as we've said, 9 billion is the amount of the fund, the net raise ultimately that we want into the fund. So how that will be raised, it will also be raised, as we spoke about, is equity. So the capitalization will be 10 billion at launch. Now that 10 billion, what it includes is the 210 million of pre-commitments. They essentially will have 3% or 300 million pounds worth of equity in the fund at that capitalization rate. Of course, it's theoretical at that first stage, but so essentially they would own 3% of the fund when it is diluted, or including the dilution for options for all of the talent that are involved in managing the fund and the bank and its divisions. So there will be a number of different share option pots that are available for the different personnel in the different departments and in the investment management side. And in addition, there are some of that equity is essentially reserved for the founding team, for existing investors and stakeholders who have helped me on this vision, in this journey for many years, and other stakeholders that we might bring on board in the form of acquisitions. So essentially, the bulk though of those additional, to bring the cap to 10, is in performance options based upon achieving a share price target when the vehicle floats, which is also dependent clearly on underlying performance of the fund and the ventures that it invests in. So we think this is a really exciting structure, and it's a structure that can get so many people excited and give long-term rewards, but rewards that are tied very closely to the impacts that they generate. You can see here that 200 million pounds, actually, while it's contingent on successfully raising the fund, when that fund is raised, it is paid over as a success fee. So essentially that 210 million raise is a success fee for the 9 billion fundraise. And what that means is that success fee, in addition to some retainers that would be paid out of the initial 90 million of equity to show the serious and significant banks and placement agents and parties and partners who would be helping raise that 9 billion fund, it's providing some good faith investment. It's also helping them compete, but then the success fee of 210 million is significant. And we recognize this is a huge sum of money. It makes up potentially, even for the largest banks, the Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley's or Credit Suisse's, or second tier really, Moelis and Company, there's which has an awful lot of relevant connections. We recognize that 210 is a significant proportion of their annualized investment banking fee income. And it could be done fairly quickly, because this is suitable for sovereign wealth funds, for governments in certain locations, and for institutional investors. And providing it structured properly, and the talent who will be managing the fund and managing the bank, that includes myself, but there'll be many others, providing that talent stacks up, this vision stacks up, and we believe it can be done in a relatively tight time frame. When we say that, perhaps within 6 to 8 months of launching the first, of raising the first 15 million, then raising the 300, and from the point the 300 is raised, we think the full 9 billion fund could be in operation 6 to 8 months after that. So potentially a year to a year and a half from raising the first capital, this could be out of the game. So as we said, the fund will do off and on market investments, meaning off market it will make private investments into ventures and infrastructure projects and companies through its butterfly basket investment portfolio or portfolio structure, and through its special opportunities fund. And it will also have a direct investment into Transform Global itself, which we'll talk about later. But it will also do on-market investing through trusted and reputable third-party investment managers. So essentially, it isn't quite a fund of funds. You could argue it's a fund of fund management, but essentially a portion of that capital, the capital that's not reserved for the annual private transactions, it will be, which in year one would be over £8 billion, that would be invested through third-party investment managers to enable greater impact, because it's designed to be impact invested, but also to deliver additional returns that can be meaningful to the overall portfolio and enable the ongoing investment capacity to be maximized. So there's no carried return. I touched on this earlier when I talked about the incentives and the 10 billion cap, the performance-based share options for the people involved. But unlike private equity or venture capital, there's no 20% carried return. We decided, and I primarily believe, that this is not efficient. It's not ideal for this structure. Some fund structures do have that. They still have a carried return that are listed private equity type vehicles. But for this, I believe very passionately, the best way to create long-term incentives is to provide options on equity, as well as the ability for people to buy equity in the fund when it launches separately. And where those options, those performance options, are tied to collective performance and tied to impact targets being met. And where a portion of that equity is essentially released every month for many years, for 5-10 years. And depending on how many people are inside the organization or inside the investment management part of the organization, the 360 fund management, SDG 360 fund management, then the options will be available for them depending on their salary. It will be a formula related to the percentage of the overall salary budget, and everyone will be on the same basis, senior people and junior people. But clearly, senior people are earning rather more. Salaries are designed to be competitive, not exceptional, not excessive, and neither are they designed to be below what should be paid in the market to get the best people. So by tying the impacts to those returns and avoiding the zero carried return, we think this is a best motivational capability. Here we are, performance options. And that is for all the talent inside Transform Global. So meaning it's for the people inside the management company, the umbrella business, the bank, the SDG 360 Fund Management, and the divisions, so Funding the Global Goals.tv and Big Crowd. They are all able to get performance options in the fund, and the fund, as we've talked about, will also have a stake in the bank, so it links together. There is a 2% management fee, and that 2% management fee is £180 million per annum. That 180 million, half of it, 90 goes to Transform Global. We'll cover what that is in return for in a moment, and 90 million goes to SDG 360 Fund Management. The principle here is we want to demark those who are responsible and focused for making the investment decisions with those who are supporting them and supporting the portfolio organizations and investments on every level. So it's important to say that this is about strategic equity, meaning the investors in the fund, some of them will be sovereign wealth funds that encourage us to put our regional headquarters in their location, which could be a financial location. We believe we'll have regional headquarters in the Middle East, in Asia, in the Americas, North America, possibly also South America, and certainly Europe. And that will enable us to have a coverage and also smaller satellite offices around the world. Because of what we're doing, as you'll learn in a moment, there'll be a lot of incubation and acceleration activity that's funded and partners to do that. So the strategic investment angle means, what do governments all want? They want significant job creation, and they want strategic issues to be addressed in the most intelligent way. We believe that this model, I say we, there are people around me, but I believe that this model has the potential to deliver on those aims, those strategic aims. And any government would be foolish, and I say that bluntly, not to seriously consider a partnership with this game-changing venture, because let's face it, it can generate inward investment from around the world, it can generate an awful lot of jobs, and it can deliver the kind of sustainable innovation, development and rollout countries and regions need massively. So if you're representing a government that I speak of, feel free to get in touch, although we'll be in touch ourselves in due course. It's also just important to say that this is there's a potential to blend the capital, which we are not factoring in our initial assumptions. So this is a 9 billion equity fund. It's 9 billion of equity. There's no leverage on top of that, no debt that would be added that we factor in. Although there is the potential to do that either to the portfolio, to the companies that we're investing into, or to the fund, or indeed to the traded investments that we make. So by adding debt responsibly, or by using strategic guarantees to lower the risk portion for certain investors that are important but maybe can't justify the risk profile for whatever reason, by using guarantees from philanthropists and from governments, it also enables us to lower on that debt, if we are using debt, the cost of capital. And what that does is it enables us to deliver more impact investment to generate greater blended returns and really fulfill the mission. But it's important to say that that is not necessary for success. So it's a really amazing, nice to have, but we're not factoring it in. Catalytic Impact. As I said, it's about investing into other platforms as well through the Special Opportunities Fund or through Transform Global. So this could be, for example, it could be a microinsurance organization that would provide essentially risk mitigation for some of the entities that we might be investing in or servicing directly or indirectly. Or it could be a working capital type funding vehicle. So ultimately what we were looking to do is extend the reach and capability, but also the strategic value add to the portfolio that we're delivering. And it's really important to say that, yes, if you're investing in one organization, fantastic. But if you're investing in one organization and investing others that can co-invest or support their business model development in one way or another, then you have the combined and collective impacts that can be significant. Compliance focus, it's just really important to talk about. The model is designed with a very strict risk management profile that's got multiple tiers. It will exist inside the foundation with a governance and overseeing role, as well as a share structure that enables the foundation and its trustees to have a veto of things that are material, which is really important for the long-term future of this, albeit that foundation has to get to maturity before it can exercise that veto. So initially there's a strong leadership focus, but that transitions over time to a longer term governance capability. There's also teams within, as you'll see in a moment, in Transform Global itself that will focus on compliance, and within the fund itself. Augmented intelligence. As we have mentioned in other presentations, there's an AI decision engine that's central to this. It's about augmented as opposed to automated. So when you're able to gather data from the help and support one is providing to the portfolio through the funding of that help and support, you can better understand, progressively understand, as they move from stage to stage, which have got greatest potential for impacts, where there's issues or remediation that needs to be tackled, where there is market opportunities that are increasing or decreasing because of external factors. There's so much that needs to be and can be incorporated. So because this business model has an ecosystem approach, it really will be from the investors to the professional services firms to the other impact investment funds that might be providing deal flow. There's so many parties that will also have access and provide inputs to that AI decision engine. So those who are making investment decisions, whether it is in which investment managers to place our liquid capital, or whether it's which deals to invest the first million into, or progress the second 4 million or 12 or so on, that ability to have a big data approach and an augmented intelligence approach is very powerful indeed. But we're not taking away the ability for individuals through an intelligent governance structure to make the decisions. It's not automated. Okay, so all of that we think is an impact investment fund of awe-inspiring proportions, and I hope you agree that that is the case. But let's look at how it will operate. Let's look at Transform Global first of all. So we talked about the 180 million, the 2% of the 9 billion for management of this fund with a management agreement that frankly has performance targets. So ultimately, if the business does not deliver, then there is the potential for the fund to be managed externally. But if it does deliver, it will have an indefinite management capability for the fund. So this 90 million budget, essentially 50%, that will fund 300 dedicated personnel in a number of departments that we'll talk about in a moment. And they're dedicated to the SDG 360 fund management. Now, the bank itself, Transform Global, will generate other revenue externally and will have other personnel from advisory fees that it can generate and fee income from various other activities or from its portfolio. Now, those additional people are separate to these 300 personnel that we talk about that are covered through that initial 90 million annual budget. So that budget will also fund a very healthy technology and facilities budget and all the operational costs associated, both for itself and also for the people who are managing the SDG 360 fund management. Separately, the technical assistance, incubation, acceleration, any property and operational costs are covered separately through that budget allocation. So as we said, it will operate the butterfly basket portfolio design. So Transform Global itself will manage the technology and the brand associated to that portfolio design. And to be honest, the goal is to provide it as an open source investment methodology that other impact investors will be able to use. While it's proprietary, we recognize the value of getting it out into the world, as long as, you know, the mission critical conditions are adhered to. So for example, it doesn't work on a small size fund. It needs to be broad enough to invest across themes and sub-themes and stages, for example. Okay, so we'll talk about teams now. So the leadership team, there is technology teams who are managing the technology, the ICT and the AI decision support engine. A development team, this development team will be working with the portfolio. This is separate to those who are essentially working for the stage 1 and stage 2 investments. So when we invest $500,000 of cash and $500,000 of help and support, or when we invest $1 million of help and support and $3 million of cash into those organizations, they're funding the development at that stage. So these development teams that we're talking about here inside the umbrella, the bank, they're essentially working with the later stage opportunities to really help drive their success, and also develop the integration of the network. So it's not just internal development, it's external development that we'll be working on. Advisory. So the bank itself will have a corporate finance consulting advisory business or capability. So if portfolio companies are raising additional capital, the advisory people, the advisory teams, for no additional fees, no additional retainers, but there will be a success fee attached. They will raise co-investment or help provide exits or consulting capability. That advisory fee is really about providing all the help and support those individuals and those teams and managers require. Distribution. So this is about fundraising. Essentially, it's about raising not only for our own fund. We'll have some people internally who will be part of the raise for the 9 billion, but this is for the raise of capital for the portfolio companies. So it could be external investment or co-investment. So we might, for example, do an investment of $1 million and then a 4 million round, but we might want to top that up with $1 million from external sources, or a 2 million on the 4 million. So the company itself would essentially get 5 million and $1 million of help and support. So that sales and distribution and service and fundraising team, they'll be involved in that. Communications, that's PR and marketing and outreach, and that's our strategic communications, but also our ongoing outreach. Impact, that's impact measurement and research. It's really looking at where the markets that we're operating in, what the need is, what the opportunities are. It's really providing an impact intelligence to the whole business. Strategy, obviously we're looking at innovation and product development. So this could be other fund structures that are complementary. It could be our own capital structure, which governments to work with and focus on, and how we charge, where revenue is generated for the bank. We're also looking at compliance, so the risk and ESG activity, and we've already said that sits inside the Transform Global Trust Foundation for an oversight, but it also sits inside the bank itself. And operations. Operations meaning everything from finance to talent and recruitment, to ongoing human resource support, and all central services. So this could be transport and whatever is required. So yes, there's 300 people supported by the budgets, paid for essentially by that entire 90 million a year. So, and then there's additional, as we spoke about, there's additional personnel that come via the investments and acquisitions that we make. Many of them will be revenue positive, cash flow positive and profitable potentially. Some won't be, but we can top them up with our own working capital. But the idea, quite simply, is that the 300 people sit inside the bank. That is in addition to those that come and are generated by our additional transaction fees, platform capacity, etc. Now, SDG 360 fund management. The other 90 million budget covers SDG 360. That's 450 personnel who are focused and dedicated. Now, of course, we talked about there is the bank support on top of that, and incentives. We've got the performance-based options on the fund value and long-term performance and impacts. So then, who are the people who sit inside the fund? We've got stage CEOs. So the stage, there will be early, middle, and late CEOs. So people who are familiar and able and very competent. Although we will change people around and really stretch their capability, the idea is there is individuals, in addition to the chair of the fund and the CEO, will also be CEOs for each stage. Then the hierarchy is principals, presidents, vice presidents. It's a little American in its structure, we recognize, but we think it's a useful model to follow. Analysts and associates. So that's the model. Essentially, we've got something called dynamic diversity. So, as we said, there'll be people dedicated to do early, middle, and late, although clearly these individuals will be collaborating quite closely. Also, we've got diversity between market and SDG focus and expertise. The idea is, although all of these 17 global goals are clearly a lot to take on, the scale of this means we can do so and still have experts responsible for water, or responsible for climate, or responsible for smart cities, or good job creation, or innovation, or gender equality, or any of the other education, for example. So the key here is people will be multi-faceted, but they will have responsibility and expertise. We've also got geography. The idea is to have individuals all over the world, but with centers in regional headquarters and a global headquarter. And it's important also to say that the fact that the bank itself, Transform Global, has Big Crowd and Funding the Global Goals.tv, and also the things that come through the acquisitions that we're able to make. And the fund itself will have people that are essentially spread around the world. But the footprint essentially means that we can cover the largest territories. Some of them sparsely. We recognize you know it would take tens or hundreds of thousands of people to cover the world properly, but certainly in regional and country locations that are relevant, and we will have personnel. And for the smaller countries and smaller regions that doesn't warrant full-time personnel initially, we will have associates and partners. So we have really the ability for intelligence all over the world. Experience. Clearly, we want people who are highly experienced, but we also want young, bright minds who are educated and able, but most important, have the enthusiasm and dedication and passion for delivering impact. And with the right management and training programs, clearly we don't want too many young, bright minds, and silly. We don't want too many people who are more set in the old-fashioned ways of doing things. We want a mix of both, and that's the objective. And clearly we'll have people who focus on ag tech or on mobility or on sectors that actually might cover multiple of the global goals at any one time, because clearly, you know, mobility needs energy, and mobility can better expend that energy, and that energy can be renewable, but it also needs infrastructure, and it also needs services and a whole range of activities. So that's the idea in terms of the structure. Now we're just going to touch upon the concept of early stage support. So it's really important to say, as we've talked about in other presentations, the detail how the butterfly basket portfolio will operate and how those investments and that capital will be deployed. We mentioned that we're investing, and I've touched on it several times, for every £1 million deal, half a million will go to the actual organisation we're investing into, and half will go to fund dedicated help and support. Well, if you look at our investment strategy, and I think I've mentioned before that initially 360 investments of £1 million and 90 investments of 4 million, that will occur every 3 years. So essentially it's 120 investments of 1 million each year and 30 of 4 million. But over time, that cycle reduces, and it reduces to every 2 years. So the second cycle is a 2-year cycle, and the third cycle then would be a 1-year cycle. So what I'm saying essentially is when we start out, we're investing £90 million a year in help and support for the first 3 years. Then for the next 2, we're investing 180 million. And then thereafter, we're investing 270 million each year in help and support. So it's important to say that's a lot of money, and that means that we can really fund an ecosystem approach, so we can identify really best-in-class suppliers and partners, and we can pay them, for providing that help and support. So the internal teams will be big enough to do that, and to provide some of that help and support internally, but they won't be bigger than they need to be. The objective here is to be most efficient, and by incentivizing many other parties, this really helps us with media, it helps us with business generation for the entities in the portfolio. It means you could even take it as a Netflix approach. Essentially Netflix outsources its production to very high standards, and you can see the kind of success that creates. So our production equivalent here will be the help and support, and by managing it and closely observing it and working closely with the portfolio companies, this means that we can really deliver very, very best services that often they wouldn't have access to, or if they did, they might prioritize funding internal activity or other things. So really what we're doing is it's really buying intelligence on behalf of those game-changing projects. And it's also important to say that this system is very similar to what will be utilized in Big Crowd. So while Big Crowd will for the subscribers it generates and the prizes it can fund, the structure of the prizes is 20,000 a month sterling in cash for 3 years, 10,000 to be spent on governance and impact reporting, and 70,000 per month is spent on exactly the kind of help and support that we are explaining here. The difference is that with Big Crowd, we won't have made an investment at the point we are supporting them. Also with Big Crowd, it can go into not-for-profit organizations and game changers who really want to scale and deliver impact, as well as for-profit activity. And essentially with Big Crowd, the revenue to fund that help and support and those prizes is coming from the subscriber base. Whereas, or donors or governments or sponsors who also want to fund a 3.6 million 3-year prize into a sector or an area to drive innovation incredibly well. We think, well, I mean, Big Crowd is super exciting on its own. I'll explain it in a separate presentation, but that carrot and that deal flow is very, very powerful. But the point is, we're providing the same help and support to the entities within Transform Global as we are to the entities that are funded through the SDG 360 Game Changer Fund, as we are to those that are funded through the Big Crowd prizes and awards. So we talked about augmented intelligence. Big Crowd will provide some of that technology, and that will be adapted by Transform Global. And this is really, it's really about the entrepreneurs, it helps drive their performance. It helps get them investment ready for follow-on capital. It helps us get intelligence so that we know which ones are the better opportunities to back for impact and for financial returns that work for the whole of the fund. Some of them will have much higher risk with much higher potential rewards and impacts. And it helps us blend the portfolio. So that AI, augmented intelligence approach, and the whole thing helps us drive that level of performance, which is attractive for those entrepreneurs who have put their lives into it sometimes, who've been working for many years or not. Some of them will be new, some of them will be very, very innovative. And the reality is this means that they can get fast capital, intelligent capital, as much as they need to generate success, providing their ideas stack up, or their ventures, or their projects, whatever they are. So that 90 million a year, the first 3 years, then 180 for the next 2 years, and then 270 a year thereafter, is going to be spent on talent and recruitment support, on PR, on storytelling, on presentations, on fundraising and introductions. And it will be covering in this respect the retainer that would normally be necessary to pay for a corporate finance provider or fundraiser. In this case, essentially that funding is providing that. But if we or the teams essentially go on to raise funds, then there would be a success fee in addition to the basic retainers that are essentially paid out of these budgets. The success fee is between 4 and 6% typically, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the work that needs to be done. But by paying the retainers, it is essentially a very, very powerful model. Strategy, we'll be providing strategy support, technical development. Now, this is not just software development. This could be heavy engineering, it could be water, it could be infrastructure. So the idea is this ecosystem of partners can really get involved, and so can the corporate venturing parties who we would be partnering with as well. Many of them might want to do so to identify future market opportunities or future investment opportunities or acquisition targets, which is okay. We have to get the demarcation right, but this is essentially a really powerful way of getting everybody who is necessary fully motivated and providing the support they need. Well, we're in a virtual world now, so there will be virtual events, but there'll also be a lot of in-person events that are incredibly well filmed, going with the presentation support that those entrepreneurs will also get, where we're helping managing their presentation ability and their ability to engage with the audience they need and do so on an ongoing basis. When you put that with the meetings and events and the other outreach we're doing, this can be really, really powerful. In addition, accounting and legal. And again, it's really important to say, we're not going to be forcing the individuals and leaders and teams to take all of these services or all of the providers that we recommend or give them. It's a tailored approach. So some people might need, or some entities might need more strategic support, or at a particular time legal support, or they might need ongoing help with the storytelling and PR, which we can use fundingtheglobalgoals.tv to really help tell those stories and showcase their innovations to people that could be their teams or their customers or their future investors. So these things are really, really important, and they always get overlooked, or if they don't, the organizations, small organizations, have to multitask and do all these things as well as doing their core activity. And we know they can't. And that's why the failure rate is artificially high. It doesn't need to be. So we're on the last stretch now. I apologize. This is over 40 minutes, but it is important for those who want to understand the detail. And I recognize this might not be many people initially, but over time, we think it could be pretty important. So thank you for bearing with this presentation to get to this point. So as we've said, there's a lot to this And there's a staged approach to the fundraising. Although it's a massive vision, it's designed to step by step by step and deliver and escalate the credibility quite significantly. So initially what we're doing is we're raising $500,000 that will be followed very quickly after by another $2 million. And basically what that does is it gets everything moving, it gets the teams operational, it launches fundingtheglobalgoals.tv with regular programming, and it launches the tech for a big crowd. It also helps with the follow-on raise, which could be done between 3 and 6 months later. We know some of the potential investors for both of these rounds, and but what we want to be sure of is we're getting the right investors on the right terms. That $12.5 million is designed to help Big Crowd and fundingtheglobalgoals.tv scale to provide the regulatory environment. Initially, we will be an umbrella regulated by a third party, but over time we need to ensure this is regulated appropriately, and that will it won't be a full banking license because we won't be taking deposits from the public and we won't be issuing capital on the back of those deposits, but it will be a corporate finance and an investment management business, for want of a better word. So it needs to be regulated appropriately, and the people within it, myself included, and that is essentially what we'll be putting in place, as well as doing the next fundraise. And we're already looking at who the 300 million can come from, and we've got an idea of who that can come from. It won't be one individual, most likely. It'll probably be several organizations and individuals. And the 300 million, as you can see here, it's 90 million of equity and it's 210 as a pre-commitment to the fund. That 90 of equity, 20 will go to fundingtheglobalgoals.tv, 20 to Big Crowd, 20 will help provide the retainers and pay for the fundraise for the 9 billion and set up and structuring of the fund. 5 million will go to the foundation to provide it with the management to provide, and 5%, I don't think I've said, 5% of ongoing revenue for Transform Global will go into the foundation. And then 25 million is there for working capital. As we said, I think on this presentation, but also elsewhere, 360 million, when the fund is raised, the 9 billion fund, automatically it will be raised, and a 360 million investment on pre-agreed terms, which can be seen on the fundraising presentation, would be made into Transform Global. This is really important because what it does is it aligns the interests of all parties. So investors in the fund have got a stake in Transform Global, and they benefit if Transform Global is a success, and the capitalization helps that to be the case. And the capitalization of Transform Global helps the fund to be a success. And the structure with the performance-based share options, what that does is it really drives the performance and the alignment of all individuals in the fund or managing the fund and within Transform Global and its divisions. So everyone is focused on making the business and the fund a success, which could be good, should be good for all parties. But most importantly, it's about delivering the impacts, the target impacts that we lay out. And it is there in the governance in our founding charter. So then when that 360 is raised, 90 million of it would be raised for fundingtheglobalgoals.tv. And this is really exciting. This would fund the first maybe 2 to 3 years of operations for the TV channel. So it would mean we can have regional hubs. It means we can have citizen journalists and journalists in different locations covering events such as the UN General Assembly or the COP later this year. In the UK, we have the COP 26, I think it is, in Glasgow. And these are truly important events to tackle climate or all of the important issues that we need to address. So by providing the media that will also go into the World Economic Forum and also help cover things like the Milk and Global conferences and other conferences, as well as the variety of content, which is podcasts and it is educational shows and news and interviews and in-depth profiles of game-changing projects and fund structures and innovations. All of this ties into everything else that what we're doing. So it's pretty powerful. Big Crowd is one of the revenue generators for the bank. It's something that can be very profitable and very significant on its own, and it is indeed fed and supported by fundingtheglobalgoals.tv from a media perspective, but it's also something that can be very significant for deal flow, as we've said. 90 million will be allocated to acquisitions and investments, and that will be things like boutique impact investment advisors, distribution organizations, or essentially placement agents and individuals. Sometimes we will bring them in with an acqui-hire in one form or another, although clearly we want to use that capital intelligently. So we will be making sure that we're not overpaying for these acquisitions or for these investments. Sometimes we won't even invest, we will just partner. But where we can, we want to bring people under one roof intelligently so that they can really work all over the world. And I've been looking for many years at which could be included. And those include events organizations who specialize in impact and who specialize in ESG and the related areas. Impact measurement is an area that we may make one or two acquisitions in also. So as you can see, it's kind of a build and buy and innovate type strategy. And then 90 million will be used as additional working capital. There are additional funding rounds. The idea is that we raise then another 600 million or thereabouts prior to an IPO that would float the Transform Global model and separate to the flotation of the SDG 360 Game Changer Fund. And we think this approach is fundable. It's fundable relatively quickly for the scale and size. And the key is getting the first 15 and then the 300 million and the talent that can pull this off in the right way. So as you see here, it's designed to catalyze trillions required for intelligent economic recovery to address the SDGs all over the world. So thank you very much for watching. If you've got to the end, I'm impressed and I appreciate your time. You might have questions and you'll be very welcome to fire them at me, steve@transformglobal.co. It's an exciting vision, but there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of detail has already been done. I welcome your feedback. I welcome your questions. Feel free to check out our YouTube channel, our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter posts. They're light at the moment, but a lot of posts and content will be coming soon. There are websites for fundingtheglobalgoals.tv, transformglobal.co, and bigcrowd.net, where you can learn about the rest of the vision. Clearly, we need to recruit a lot of amazing people. If you think you'd like to be involved, get in touch. Obviously, we're raising intelligent impact investment, so feel free, if you want to know more, to get in touch too. This is only for professional investors and accredited investors. It's not a offering for retail investors. We'd like one day that to be the case, but initially we have to do it in a way that makes the most sense and where it is fair and intelligent for those that are adding the most value. So thanks for watching, and feel free to check out the other presentations as well. Thanks.